Hello friends, as promised, I'm going to do a part 2 to the John Gacy video where we talked about serial killers, but particularly Gacy. And I'm going to do it today in the context of one of my favorite books. This book is by a guy named Kenneth Wooden. And it's actually called Child Lures. Maybe it's better. It's still backwards. It's actually called Child Lures: What Every Parent and Child Should Know About Preventing Sexual Abuse and Abduction. So the book itself is an older book from the 90s, but Kenneth Wooden spent a lot of time talking to prisoners who actually did kill and abduct and sexually molest children. And from that, he gleaned a lot of information that I want to pass on to you in the context of the Gacy case. So, the first part of Kenneth Wooden's book, by the way, his jobs are listed in his past. He was a teacher, a consultant, and a journalist. And he's most concerned with the well-being of children, which is what drove him to write this wonderful book, Child Lures. And again, his name is Kenneth Wooden, Wooden. I bought my copy on Amazon. It was fairly cheap. It was a few dollars because it's an older book. Well worth the read, well worth the few dollars to order it from Amazon because it could protect you and your children. So the first part of the book is about pedophiles. It describes and explains the mindset of the pedophile. Gacy, John Wayne Gacy, was definitely a pedophile. Although he did assault and kill older men, I shouldn't say older men, young men who were over 18, his primary focus was teenage boys. And so as we're talking about some of these ways that children can be lured into dangerous situations, I'm going to let you know which ones Gacy employed to lure his victims. If you recall, John Wayne Gacy was a serial killer here in the United States, and he murdered, they think, around 33 people. All but 5 were buried in the crawl space under his house. And prior to committing these crimes, he had an arrest history for pedophilia. In those days, it had a different name. I don't remember if it was assault on a minor or sexual assault on a minor. Sometimes now we talk about it as felonious sexual assault of a minor. By the way, Dahmer was also a pedophile. Many of his victims, he was a serial killer as well, were also young men, teenage boys. So carefully, I'm just going to explain in a tidy sort of way the profile that Kenneth Wooden describes of the child molester. So child molesters and pedophiles, they come from all walks of life. There's nothing that's consistent. Gacy, for example, was well-liked. He was an upstanding citizen. He was trustworthy. And all of those items provided a good cover for the crimes that he was committing. He definitely, most child molesters or pedophiles have powerful sexual urges, and they have clever ways that they employ to attract their prey. I did make notes, so I am looking at my notes here to make sure I cover everything. So Gacy's lure that he used to attract prey was, he was a leader, a prominent leader in the JC organization, and he would attract his prey by showing stag movies. And stag movies back in the day were what we would call pornography now. And he would say to these young men that he met, that he worked with, young men from his community, hey, I'm going to be showing this movie at my house, and you're welcome to come. And then once they were there, he would give them alcohol. He would give them marijuana or other drugs of the day. Remember, Gacy isn't a modern day killer. He was like 60s, 70s. So whatever was popular in those days, he would make it available so these young men would also spread the word. hey, if you go to this guy's house, he'll show you porn and stag movies. That's what they called them then. And, he'll also give you alcohol and he'll give you drugs. So that's a really common lure. So he lists some of the lures in his book, Kenneth Wooden. And again, I urge you to get a hold of this because it is a really handy book to have and to look through. It gives all kinds of good information and ways to keep your children safe and ways to keep yourself safe as well, especially if you're a young person, young man or young woman. So the common lures are affection, assistance, authority, bribery, ego or fame, fun and games, jobs, a playmate, porn, or drugs and alcohol. And as we just mentioned, Gacy used all of these except the fame one and the assistance one. Ted Bundy, the assistance one was very popular with him. He would pretend to lose a puppy or that he had a broken arm and he couldn't get into his car, and young women would fall for it hook, line, and sinker because he was very attractive as well. So moving on, there's so much to cover, and I don't want to make this video too long, so I might actually not do quite as much as I originally intended. So Gacy was actually a mentor to young boys, and in the book, there's actually a letter in Kenneth's book, the Child Lures book, and it's written by a child molester. And it's definitely worth a look. I'm not going to take the time to read it now, but it is interesting because it's sort of like all the things that I would tell you about what I want to do to your child if I could tell you and get away with it. And I find that just incredibly helpful to look at it and kind of get into the mindset of the child molester. So authority is definitely another item that a child molester will use. Sometimes they'll appear, pretend to be a police officer, pretend to be a security guard, pretend to be some kind of official so that the child feels safe going to them. And again, Gacy was actually a foreman type role. He took care of his block. So the JCs had this organization or this organizational type thing going on where, someone would be appointed to take care of their community, of their block, the people who lived in that local community. And John Wayne Gacy was one of those guys. He talks about it in interviews. I've been watching on Peacock a documentary about John Wayne Gacy. I'm actually not finished with it yet. It's pretty intense. I kind of have to take breaks sometimes just for my own PTSD. I know, strange that I do this work, but I think it's kind of a mission. I want to keep people safe. And he talks about, as they do the interviews, this idea that if a little old lady in the neighborhood needed her walkway shoveled or, anybody needed anything, he was the guy that would get it for them. So he really made himself indisposable, beloved, and so that he could fit in, because this shielded him from discovery, and it also gave him access to young boys. So never assume because somebody looks like a good guy that they're above doing things that are really pretty awful behind closed doors. Okay, secret gifts. So secret gifts, that's another big tip-off that your child could be in trouble. If they're receiving gifts from an adult and the adult is telling them to keep it a secret from you, there could be some agenda that is nefarious at work. So you really want to encourage your kids not to accept gifts from people if they're asking them to keep it a secret and they're telling them, I'm going to give this to you. I know you'd really like this, but please don't tell your parents. Anytime kids are being asked to keep things a secret from their parents or their caretakers, that is a sign of trouble. So this is a good thing to talk to your kids about, and it's just kind of a good thing in general. If people are asking you to keep secrets, it's probably not something that is worthy or something that is genuinely good. And it's probably not a great idea to do that. And I can attest to this. In my past relationship with my abusive ex, I kept a lot of secrets for him for a long time. And whether you agree or not with the decision of the Amber Heard case, Ms. Heard also talked about the relief of not having to keep secrets anymore. It's a huge burden when you know that people are doing things that are not right and you're being asked to keep that a secret and keep that quiet. It's never a positive thing. It's never a good thing. Usually you're protecting somebody who's a criminal, and that's the bottom line. We already talked about the stag parties. We talked about the alcohol, things like that. Again, it's hard with kids because they are really easy prey to that. If they want to drink underage, if they want to do drugs, if they want to, in those days, in Gacy's day, pornography was really hard to come by. Now it's pretty easy. Our kids just go online, and if it's something they want to access, they'll probably find a way to do that. But in Gacy's day, it was so taboo that it was difficult to come by porn. So to have this guy that was saying, hey, come to my house, I'm going to give you alcohol, I'm going to give you drugs, and we're going to watch, pictures of naked people having sex, that was a huge draw. And it made the kids really accessible to him. And of course, it also made him popular with the young people. And none of them seemed to have any idea that he had these plans for them until they were in those situations. And there were some that got away. There were some who he victimized sexually, but they were able to get away and get the better of him and get the upper hand so they were not killed. But again, as we talk about the way we treat victims, we're still telling victims to shut their mouths. We're still telling victims, we don't believe you. And as long as we keep doing that, people who are child molesters, people who are sexual abusers will keep getting away with it. So something to think about. We don't want to tell people to be quiet. We want to tell people to speak out and speak up. And we want to support people who are doing that. Okay, another lure in the book that Kenneth Wooden talks about is jobs. Job situations for young people are a good draw. And John Wayne Gacy owned his own business. It was a construction business, I believe. And so he would offer jobs to these young men. And he would say, hey, I really like you. Why don't you come work for me? And by all accounts, he was a pretty good boss. So again, this gave him access, and it made him a local superhero because he was employing all these young people. And his former wife, his ex-wife, she actually talks about this, how in the interviews in the Peacock special, she talks about, I think some other people talk about it as well, in that it was strange. And they asked him, why do you employ young people? Because you have to train them. And these young people don't know anything about the business, and that's a lot of work. And, he basically came off as being this really good guy who was going out of his way to help these young men. But in truth, he was setting up a situation where he was grooming these young men so that he could abuse them and then later murder them. So it is quite serious, and we have to be very careful when our young people go looking for jobs, and we have to be very careful about who they're working for, and we have to carefully examine these situations. I would say any situation where it's not like a big public entity, like a big chain, store, like Walmart or Market Basket, things like this, I think you do have to have concern. And I think you do have to communicate with your kids consistently. Where are you working today? And how long does your boss think you're going to be there today? Will you be home for dinner? Those kinds of things. It seems very old-fashioned, but checking in with our kids is a really wonderful way to keep them safe. And my kids, from the get-go, if they wanted to have a cell phone and they wanted to have that freedom with their friends, the expectation that has come with it, and I model this for my kids with my husband and with them, is that you will stay in touch. You will text me, takes 2 seconds to text me, and let me know where you're at. And of course, in Gacy's days, these poor young men who lost their lives, there were no cell phones. There was no way to do this. It was during the time when there were only payphones. And, if you weren't near a payphone, how could you call and communicate with your parents? So in that way, we live in much safer times because communication, the ability to communicate with our kids has become much greater. And I just really encourage you. I know you might feel like a helicopter parent or get accused of that. I get accused of it all the time. I don't really care. If it keeps my kids safe and it keeps my kids alive, I'm going to keep being a helicopter parent because my job is to protect them. And I love these young people and I want them to be safe. Okay. Another lure that's talked about. Oh, actually, that was all the lures that I really wanted to talk about from the book that I kind of highlighted. There are more, and I really encourage you to get a hold of this book. If you type it into Google and you type in Child Lures, Lures, and you type in his name, Kenneth Wooden, Wooden, you will be able to find this book, and I really suggest that you read it because it has some excellent things that will help keep your kids safe. And in the end, the reason that I do these videos, the reason I do this work is because my goal as a forensic psychology consultant is to make it difficult for people like Gacy. I want to make it hard for them to grab your kid and hurt them or kill them. And I want to make it safer for families in general. I started this work focused on domestic violence victims. And as I've gotten into the work, I've realized that really the kids are the mission. Not just keeping them safe, but also educating them and letting them know to be wary and to be safe and how to be careful. And I remember at one point my daughter, she was about 14, and she said, "Oh my gosh, Mom, you're scaring me. You're so scary. You tell me all these scary things." And I said, "Honey, I don't want to scare you. That's not the goal. The goal is to make you wiser and smarter and to keep you safe." And unfortunately, the world we live in, this is something we need to do for our kids. I wish we could preserve their innocence a little longer. I wish we could find another way to protect them and still allow them to have their childhood. And it's kind of a difficult balance. So what I recommend is, in your home, make your home a haven. When you're home with your kids, make it a place that's fun and safe for them and their friends, and create really great memories with them. Or if you take your kids places, just keep a really close eye on them. But again, that family time is the time to provide a haven for your children. I always saw our home, as my kids have grown up over the last 13 years, as a place of safety and wanting to really keep it a haven where they could come home and they could just relax and they didn't have to worry about the outside world. But I have really raised my kids to, when they are outside of this place, of this house, I do want them to have their eyes wide open. I want them to be thinking individuals, and I want them to be protective of other people as well. It's a line from, I think, the Sniper movie, and they talk about how there's sheep, there's wolves, and then there's sheepdogs. And that really stuck with me. And as I've continued my journey to get more education in forensic psychology, still working on my PhD, definitely getting close to the end, very excited about that. And I will keep you updated as those things move forward. Because eventually I would like to be Dr. Roberts. That would be pretty amazing. And as I move forward and I think about these things, my goal is to be a sheepdog. And my goal is to teach all of you to be sheepdogs, to watch over those around you and really make it difficult for the Gacys of the world and the Dahmers of the world. Make it hard for people to do things to hurt others by being watchful and being aware and being ready and available to help in ways that are safe for you to help. Thank you. Have a great day, folks.